I was so excited when my dad said I was finally old enough to go hunting with him. We loaded up the truck early Saturday morning and headed to our family's cabin deep in the mountains. The drive there was long and bumpy. The paved road turned into a winding dirt trail surrounded by towering pines. When we arrived at the cabin, everything seemed normal at first, but then we noticed the front door slightly ajar. We slowly went inside, only to find all our belongings ransacked. Someone had clearly broken in and gone through everything. Dad said we needed to get out of there right away. Without the truck keys, we'd have to hike 5 miles back to town. We hurried down the trail as the sun started to set. Chills ran down my spine, worrying about being stuck in the woods at night. A snapping twig made us jump. Dad aimed his rifle at the sound, but it was just a deer bounding away. We picked up pace, the darkness creeping in faster. Another snap of a branch made my heart stop. Dad wheeled around. A man leaped from the bushes, slamming into him. They tumbled to the ground, viciously throwing punches. I stood paralyzed in terror as the attacker gripped his hands around my dad's throat. After what seemed like forever, the thrashing stopped and the man stood up slowly. He turned to face me. His cold, dark eyes pierced my soul. He grinned widely, teeth filed to sharp points. In that moment, I knew he wasn't human. He lunged for me. I felt his claws slash my arm before I could run away. I raced blindly through the dark woods. My dad was dead, killed by this vicious monster. Now it was coming for me. I hid behind a fallen tree, trying to muffle my panicked breaths. Its heavy footsteps prowled nearby. It could probably smell my blood or sense my fear. I peered around the tree and saw its hulking form looming far too close. I jumped up and took off. As fast as I ran, it was faster. Excruciating pain erupted as its claws dug into my shoulders. It flung me to the ground and pounced on top of me. I stared up in horror at its wolfish face, framed by blood-matted hair. It pinned me down and leaned closer. Hot, rancid breath assaulted me as its sharp teeth snapped inches from my face. Delight danced in its yellow eyes, knowing I was helpless against its monstrous strength. It could end me in an instant if it wished. But it seemed to enjoy drawing out the sick game. Through my tears, I begged for mercy. The beast let out a chilling laugh. In a deep, guttural voice, it said, "Tonight we hunt, tomorrow we feast." Dread filled me as its jaws opened wide, ready to tear into my throat. Suddenly, blinding light flooded the woods. Gunshots rang out. The weight pinning me down disappeared. I glanced up to see my dad and the police surrounding the lifeless body. Somehow my dad had survived the attack. Help had arrived just in time to save me from the horrific creature's clutches. But those shadowy woods would haunt me forever. I was loaded into an ambulance, my dad climbing in beside me. As we sped towards the hospital, he explained what happened. After the wolfman initially attacked, Dad only pretended to be dead in hopes it would leave him alone. He had a concussion and some nasty gashes but managed to stay quiet and still. After the creature ran off chasing me, Dad followed its tracks as quickly as he could. He called the police, describing the situation and our general location. At the same time, he continued tracking the wolfman, firearm ready just in case. My dad arrived just as it had pinned me down, moments away from killing me. His shot distracted it while officers rushed in. They unloaded bullets until it collapsed motionless on top of me. I shuddered, thinking how close I came to being slaughtered and possibly eaten by that thing. The doctors treated me for blood loss and shock. I would have nightmares for weeks about its claws, teeth, and chilling howls. His yellow eyes will forever stain my memory. Dad and I gave our statements to police. We found out that people had been disappearing in the area for months. Our ransacked cabin wasn't the first. Locals spotted a strange wolf-like creature roaming the woods recently. Tests on the body revealed shocking results. The wolfman wasn't an animal or werewolf. It was a human, a deranged serial killer, a sicko who had filed his teeth to points and trained himself to move on all fours. He grew out his hair and nails to complete the terrifying disguise. The secluded mountains gave him plenty of victims to prey upon. Cops believe he survived by eating those poor, lost hikers. This explained his delight in hunting me and why Dad only found shredded bloody clothes from his previous victims. That traumatic trip left permanent scars, both mental and physical. I'll never view the remote wilderness the same again. Evil can hide within nature's beauty. But I'm thankful my dad and I survived that fateful day, and the maniac who had been terrorizing the mountainside was finally stopped for good. Since we were young, my best friend Jake and I always talked about going on a guy's trip to Alaska to hunt grizzly bears. After college, we finally decided to make it happen. We booked a guided bear hunt in the Alaskan wilderness and packed our warmest clothes. The remote lodge could only be accessed by float plane. As we soared over massive snow-capped mountains, I felt far removed from civilization. We landed on a tiny lake where the head guide greeted us. He drove us to the rustic lodge which would serve as base camp. After settling in, we headed out with the guide and 2 other hunters. I was startled when a moose charged across our path. The guide said we were in true untamed wilderness now. My heart raced with excitement and anxiety. We hiked to a clearing surrounded by thick forest. Using binoculars, we scanned the trees for any brown fur between the trunks. I thought I spotted movement once or twice, but it was just shadows swaying. Just before sunset, we finally saw a large male grizzly amble out of the woods about 300 yards away. Jake steadied his rifle on a bipod and took aim. He fired a single shot that echoed through the valley. The bear let out a fearsome roar and collapsed. We cautiously approached the fallen beast. Our guide determined it was dead with one perfect shot to the head. We slapped Jake on the back, congratulating him. The guide started skinning and gutting the bear as dusk fell. The float plane would come extract us first thing in the morning. We were all in good spirits around the campfire, joking and chatting. Later that night in the lodge, I was startled awake by a chilling bellow. I shook Jake, asking if he heard that. He looked at me wide-eyed. The other hunters were awake too. Our guide rationally explained it was just the call of another grizzly drawn by the smell of the dead one. He suggested we try going back to sleep. Suddenly we heard a loud snap and crunching leaves. I peered out the window, but it was pitch black outside. We quietly grabbed our firearms, ready for whatever was approaching. The lodge doors smashed open, frame splintering. A massive grizzly stood on its hind legs, roaring furiously. As it swiped a claw toward us, shots rang out. The bear thrashed around, knocking over furniture before collapsing. We were all frozen in shock and terror. The guide said this was highly unusual behavior. The animal must have smelled the dead bear and viewed us as competition. As the sun rose, we examined the giant animal laying lifeless on the floor. Jake placed his foot on its back and raised his rifle above his head victoriously. Just then, the body began to writhe and contort. We all staggered backwards, weapons aimed and ready. The creature slowly rose to stand on 2 legs once again. But it was no bear. It was some sort of mutated human covered head to toe in blood-matted fur. It looked at us and smiled viciously, rows of razor-sharp teeth glistening. We all fired rapidly, yelling at each other to aim for the head. It charged forward and swiped Jake's legs out from under him. As it loomed over Jake, teeth ready to bite, I unloaded every last bullet into its face until it slumped over, dead for real this time. We stood there panting, trying to process what just happened. The guides had no explanation for the creature that looked like a human, but moved like a bear. We decided to get some rest before the float plane's arrival in the morning. I was woken a few hours later by chilling screams and gunfire. I bolted upright to see dark figures moving through the lodge, slaughtering the guides and hunters. Jake was already up, firing his rifle at the attackers. But they kept coming, unfazed by the gunshots. These were creatures like the one we had killed, a whole pack of them. Their claws and teeth made quick work of the men until Jake and I were the only ones left. We knew we had to escape. Making a break for the door, Jake got swarmed from behind. I squeezed off shots to keep them at bay as I dragged Jake outside. We plunged into the frigid night, stumbling through the dark forest. The creature's howls chased close behind as we ran for our lives. Finally, we spotted some rangers on the shore of the lake just as the float plane arrived. We waved our arms wildly, screaming for help. The rangers met us with guns drawn, shocked by our hysteria about monsters attacking the lodge. They went to investigate and found a horrific bloodbath. Dismembered bodies scattered everywhere, but no creatures. Jake was arrested and charged with the murders, but I convinced the police that Jake must have snapped and done it all himself while I was asleep. With no evidence against me, they had to let me go. Months later, I returned to the lodge with a new group of unsuspecting hunters. There were 4 of them: Dave, Mike, Vince, and Todd. Old college buddies who saved up for this guy's trip of a lifetime. If only they knew what I had in store. I greeted them with a big smile and handshake, introducing myself as their guide. In reality, I was sizing them up. Who would be the most dangerous target? Who would be the easiest to take down first? Dave was a cocky weightlifter who foolishly thought his muscles would save him. He'd be the first to go. We loaded provisions and gear into backpacks and set out into the wilderness. The group marveled at the towering pines and sweeping mountain vistas surrounding us. I kept up friendly banter to put them at ease, make them think I was just a fun-loving guide. Little did they know every step took them closer to their gruesome fates. By midday, we reached the clearing where the previous massacre had taken place months earlier. I suggested we stop for lunch before continuing our hike to the hunting grounds. They needed to keep up their energy for what was to come. As the others laughed and chatted, I slipped away into the dense forest. I let out a low howl, summoning my creatures. They crept from the shadows, feral humanoids moving with predatory grace. They awaited my command. We would strike at sunset. I rejoined the group and led them further on, deeper into the vast wilderness, far from any chance of help. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I detected a shift in the forest sounds. The creatures were getting in position, encircling their prey. Right on schedule, the attack began at twilight. The man-beasts sprang from all sides, vicious claws slashing. Chaos erupted as the men scattered, screaming in terror. Dave turned to run, but fangs ripped into his neck before he got 2 steps. Mike had grabbed his rifle, but it was swatted away by a powerful claw. Both arms broken, he could only whimper as the beast went for the throat. Vince almost made it to the tree line before a hairy arm wrapped around his leg and dragged him to the ground. I smiled as his shrieks turned to gurgles. I had to admire Todd's will to live. He managed to evade their snapping jaws and break free of the clearing, but the creatures pursued into the growing darkness. His stumbling steps were no match for their loping gait. Soon his panicked wails went silent. The 4 lay in shredded, bloody heaps around the campsite. My loyal followers howled triumphantly under the rising moon. I lavished them with praise for their flawless ambush. Then it was time for them to feed. Bones crunched as they feasted on the remains. I gathered weapons, wallets, phones, anything that could reveal what happened here. As with the previous groups, there must be no evidence left behind, no clues to tie these disappearances together, or to tie them to me. Soon we will move on in search of new hunting grounds and fresh victims. But for now, my beast's appetite is sated. They will rest and grow stronger for the next bloody harvest. Such is the cycle of life and death, here in the untamed wilds.